Okay, welcome back. We're on chapter 5. We're continuing with the flow of food with proper procedures and product handling in your facility. So, like we talked about earlier, your reputable suppliers are going to be your best source of all of your product. Um, these are going to guarantee that supply chain measures have been adequately maintained. That will kind of ensure that a company has a standard for maintaining um, certain safety protocols, especially for time and temperature abuse. So when food gets to your back door, how should you check for that? So that's what then this chapter is going to talk about here. All right, so purchase food from approved reputable suppliers. They have been inspected, so like for instance, if it's meat, then it will have gone through a USDA inspected facility to ensure that it's safe. So this is not the same as, say, buying deer from your uncle who went hunting one day. That would put a lot of liability on your restaurant because that meat has not been inspected. So this is just kind of a measure of protection for your restaurant. The suppliers can show you inspection reports and they can trace food back to the actual ranch or farm where the food came from in the event that there is an issue with a foodborne illness outbreak. Your operations supply chain includes growers, shippers, packers, manufacturers, and the distributors. So all of these things are all kind of working together, and it is kind of sometimes it can be a long chain before something gets to your back door. So you want to make sure that each person in the chain is maintaining the same standards. So the best way to do that is to kind of develop a relationship with your vendors. You will be always given a salesperson. So we have a salesperson, which is our point person whenever we want to make orders. He can kind of answer any questions that we have about supply chain issues, food availability, when we can get something, when we can't, and the best way to get it. He also kind of, helps out with our ordering and invoices and things like that. So that's where your salesperson kind of fits into the picture. Oftentimes you'll know the manager above them also as you develop your relationship with your supplier. And they are also a good source of information. You should get to know their safety practices. So whenever you are interviewing a distributor, to consider if you want to sign on with a contract or some sort of a relationship with these people, then you want to know how they are going to keep the food safe before it arrives at your door. So if they don't have a plan, or if they can't really answer those questions, those should be very easy questions for them to answer. And that would be a huge red flag. You would say, oh, well, if you don't know, where the food comes from, or if you don't know other people's handling practices as they come down the line, then that's really something that they should know, like right off the top of their heads, right? They should be very well trained in that. They should be able to get recent inspection reports from USDA, the FDA, or any third-party inspectors that they use. And they should all be based on good manufacturing practices or good agricultural practices. When you receive your deliveries, it should be during a time when the kitchen is not. You're not going to receive deliveries when you're super busy. You should plan deliveries around your busiest service times. So if you are serving breakfast in your facility, you would want to make sure that your delivery comes maybe probably before 6 a.m. or after 9 a.m. because those are going to be your busiest breakfast hours. Typically, there's kind of a gap in between services. There's kind of a gap where it's slower between breakfast and lunch, which is when you do your prep time, when you clean up. This is when you receive your deliveries. And then there's also a kind of a gap that's between lunch and dinner. Sometimes we call it late lunch. But that's the time when you might have a few customers coming in, but it's much easier to manage the kitchen during that time because you're not getting as many orders. That's the time when you want to allow deliveries. So when you create a contract and an agreement with your vendor, you're going to be given a delivery window. And that window is basically an agreement between yourself and the company that's delivering, that basically you say that you can always receive at this time, and they can deliver at that time, right? So it has to work for both parties. When things are delivered, the person that's delivering them needs to not only check off and make sure that everything is correct on the order to make sure that you're not shorted anything, but also you need to check in, make sure that it's safe. So you should have a thermometer. You should probably also have a scale, sometimes it helps to have an extra person to help you put stuff away while you're checking. When you open a box of, say, seasonings, there shouldn't be any evidence of tampering. The box shouldn't be wet. It shouldn't be torn or have product exposed. Now, sometimes the boxes might get damaged in transport, but the inside packaging, say it's several different containers inside of a box, and just the outside box gets torn, that can happen pretty readily. You wouldn't reject that just based on the cardboard. You would reject, however, if, say, the product is exposed. So in the event of maybe a bag of flour comes in a paper bag, and if that paper bag maybe gets put down in some rainwater and then the bag gets wet, then that would be an instance where you would want to reject that, because that is opening up the flour to contamination and mold and is going to spoil. So you would not accept that. What has been practiced that I've seen is that the drivers don't really want to take it back. They're just going to have to throw it away. So what they end up doing is they leave it with you and then you throw it away. But just kind of, it won't get charged to you, so that bag of spoiled flour gets taken off of your invoice so that you don't pay for it, but also you're going to have to throw that away because it has been contaminated. You're going to inspect everything whenever it arrives. Take the time to make sure that everything looks good. You don't see anything suspicious. Everything that's frozen is still frozen. Everything that is cold is reading the correct temperature. And then if the label says something, you want to make sure that that is what is actually in the container or inside the case. A good example of this sometimes is fish products. Sometimes it's a non-reputable supplier. I wouldn't say that any of the big suppliers do this, but they may try to pass off a piece of fish for something that it's not. So something that is more highly valuable, you might get swapped for a cheaper fish. And then also check the weights. So if you have a case of meat, you want to make sure that it actually weighs what the box says that it weighs, because you want to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. Okay, so sometimes recalls do happen. This happens when there is some issue with contamination that has happened either on a farm or somewhere along the supply chain. So this can happen from just something getting contaminated in a water source or in the soil, or it can happen during the actual processing period. So when water is getting splashed on the lettuce before it gets bagged or something, there can be an issue where, food gets contaminated before it goes to the consumers. So typically this will be caught by inspectors, but sometimes it's not caught in time for us to be sure that the public hasn't bought any of those from their local store, right? So sometimes there can be a little bit that has already made it to the marketplace. In that case, sometimes people can get sick already from these contaminated items, but what they want you to do is to immediately take that food and throw it away, because there is a high chance that it has some known pathogens in it, and they are going to cause some sort of foodborne illness, especially for the more vulnerable populations, such as the elderly and young kids and the immunocompromised. So what can you do whenever you get a recall notice? In a vendor-client relationship, such as between Cisco or Benny Keith and your facility, you would end up with a recall notice that would come through an email, and basically you would have to click that you acknowledge the recall and that you will dispose of the food and destroy it. If you were to continue to use it, you would assume full liability for any foodborne illness that could happen from you continuing to use product that you know is not safe. So aside from it being highly unethical, it would also just be, it's a huge liability for your business. You can lose money, you can be sued, and then all of the negative PR that could come from that. So on your recalls, you need to make sure that you label the item in a way that will prevent it from being placed back into the inventory. So usually it needs to be completely separated, and then you need to put a great big do not use, do not throw away label on it, so that if an item is suspected of being contaminated, then that would be the set aside label where you say don't use it, but don't throw it away either. If you know that it's a recall, you've already identified it by the lot number, or a vendor has told you, please throw this away. These onions that you received on April 19th, these are the onions that need to be thrown away. You can just go ahead and throw those away. The vendor will typically tell you what to do with it, if you are eligible for a refund, or if you're just going to throw them away. Okay, so we're going to practice some receiving techniques here. So this person is receiving meat in cases. So it looks like the case is dry, it's not damaged. It doesn't look like the plastic is punctured in any way, and the meat is received at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Would this be acceptable to accept, or do we reject it? In this case, there's nothing really wrong with it, so we can go ahead and accept it. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so here we have one that's a little bit suspicious looking. We have live oysters that were received at an internal temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Would we accept them, or do we reject them? So live oysters, mussels, clams, and scallops must be received at an air temperature of 45 degrees and an internal temperature of no greater than 50 degrees. Once received, this shellfish can be cooled to 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower for 4 hours. Shucked shellfish must be received at 45 degrees or lower, and the shellfish must be then cooled to 41 degrees or lower in 4 hours. So in this case, because they are live shellfish, we do accept them. And don't forget those shellfish tags. You need to retain those, right? So on the milk is received at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, accept or reject. So these criteria are coming from Chapter 5, 5.6, delivery temperatures. So there's a chart where you can look to see what are the acceptable temperatures for receiving food, certain foods. I would make some note cards because these will probably come up later. Um, anything that is included in Servsafe can be included on the Servsafe exam. So you want to make sure that you have these differentiated in your mind. So this is milk. Milk is received at 45 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Would we accept or reject? In this case, we would accept. It's at the proper temperature for receiving. Okay. So here we have shell eggs. So whenever eggs are still in the shell, they're typically referred to as shell eggs. Eggs are also sold in containers that are already shelled. And they also sell egg product where they're separated. So you can buy a carton of all egg yolks or all egg whites. So just for clarity's sake, these are called shell eggs. They're sold in a case. So these eggs were received at an air temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you stick your thermometer kind of inside the center of the case, we're reading 50 degrees. This is actually 5 degrees too hot, so we would reject them. We expect them to come in at 45 degrees or lower. Okay, so this is hot, temperature controlled for safety food. This could be anything. This could be brisket, this could be rice, beans, anything. It is received at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which, as we know, is right at the top of that danger zone where bacteria grows most readily. In order for food to be safe, we would accept it at 135 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. So for that reason, we would have to reject that shipment of TCS foods. This one is frozen shrimp. So this frozen shrimp shows evidence of thawing and refreezing because we can see ice crystals and frozen liquids on the food and the packaging. This basically shows that the food has been time temperature abused. So when foods are individually quick frozen, so we call that IQF for short, basically all the foods are individually frozen, which means that they're not all frozen together into a block. This makes them convenient to use. So you can pull out just, if you only need 20 shrimp, you can pull them out, and you don't have to defrost an entire block of shrimp that's been frozen together. Almost all products are sold that way nowadays. But it also shows how whenever something has been thawed even a little bit, when it refreezes, it tends to refreeze back as a more solid block. You're also going to see those ice crystals, and probably some amount of moisture is going to pool on the bag, and then it's going to make kind of like ice slicks, right? That would be evidence that your shrimp or peaches or whatever frozen vegetables you have purchased has been time temperature abused at some point in the journey before it came to you. That would be a big red flag, and you would want to reject that one. Okay, so this one is a bag of flour. It's a little bit difficult to see on the slide, but this area where it's a little bit darker is representative of a water stain, which shows that the water, came in contact with the bag at some point. We don't know where the water came from or how long it was there, but this would be something that you would have to reject because it's very suspicious as to how it got wet. And it looks like it's been dried. So we don't know how long ago this happened. And we also don't know, what bacteria could possibly be inside the flour because of this exposure to the moisture. Okay, so this one is different bag of flour, but it has been damaged on the truck. So this bag of flour has a tear. This makes it available to pests and, just debris can get inside of the bag. You would always reject bags that are broken or damaged. Always make sure that they come off of your invoice so that you're not paying for them. And likewise, if you have cans or bottles that are broken or bulging or have dents in them or rusted, those would also be cause for rejecting that from your shipment. Definitely with the bulging cans, don't even open it. There's a very high chance that a bulging can has botulism. It's not as common as it used to be, but botulism can still happen. You would want to just throw that directly into the trash. Don't even open it. Those botulism spores can actually travel. Okay, so next we have some danishes. These are pre-made Danish that you would basically just heat and serve, and they're in a box. However, it looks like something else has tried to eat it first. This looks like some sort of droppings from a rodent. So you can see that they chewed the box a little bit and there's some droppings inside the box. So other than that just being disgusting, you would want to definitely reject that on the basis of it's been contaminated and can no longer be served. So even absent the roach or rodent droppings, you would still want to reject anything that looked like it had been gnawed on or eaten up on the corners like that. All right, so this one is some deli meat. So all food packaged in a reduced oxygen environment, such as a vacuum-packed meat, must be rejected if the package is bloated or leaking, which in this case it definitely is. Items with broken cartons or seals or items with dirty and discolored packaging should also be rejected. Also, do not accept cases or packages that appear to have been tampered with. Okay, so we have some fresh tuna with a seaweed smell. So this fish came from the ocean, so you should expect it to not smell fishy. Like it shouldn't smell like it's going bad, but it's going to smell like where it came from. It's going to smell oceany, and that is completely normal. So for it to smell like what it is not necessarily a concern. However, if it were to smell overly strong, pungent, if it's really emanating a very strong odor, then that would be cause for concern. But if it kind of just smells like fresh seaweed, then that's not really kind of cause for concern. We would accept it as long as it is in good condition. If it is individually quick frozen, it is still frozen and is otherwise in good condition. So fresh pork chops that are sticky. So stickiness sometimes comes along with fish and meats going bad. So they kind of get a slime on them. So you would definitely reject these. You can also tell the color's turning a little bit. They're getting a little gray. That comes from the excessive exposure to oxygen. So you would reject this meat. Also, if it has soft flesh and leaves an imprint whenever you touch it, it's basically breaking down. It's starting to decay. So these are all warning signs that the meat is no longer good. It's probably going to also have some sort of an odor. Okay. So when you are receiving your certain items, especially with shellfish, we want to retain what we call shell stock identification tags. And these are typically attached to the bag that they come in. So the tags indicate when and where the shellfish were harvested, and you have to, by law, keep them on file for 90 days from the date the last shellfish was used from its delivery container, right? So that's not just the date from when it was delivered, it's the date from when the last bit was served. So even if you decide to um, freeze some mussels and use them 6 months later, you would still have to retain those shellfish tags um, because you haven't served them yet. So required documents, fish that will be eaten raw or partially cooked, so such as sushi or sashimi. Documentation must show the fish was correctly frozen before being received. So did it actually go down to a low enough temperature? And then you have to keep documents for 90 days from the sale of that fish. For farm-raised fish, you must have documentation stating that the fish was raised to FDA standards, and you have to keep documents for 90 days from the sale of that fish. All right, so storage practices. Labeling food for on-site use. So this is a big one. This is always looked at by ACF, which is our accrediting body. Your instructors should be telling you to do this all the time. And then anytime that a health inspector comes into your premises, this is usually what people are running around making sure that all the labeling is in order so that you don't get any citations on this one. All items that are not in their original containers must be labeled. If you take rice out of a bag and you put it into a plastic container and it's clear, you can see that it's rice, it has to have a label on it no matter what. It has to have a label, it has to have a date. Food labels should include the common name of the food or a statement that clearly and accurately identifies it. It is not necessary to label food if it clearly will not be mistaken for another item. I would say that the health department disagrees with that one. Everything needs to be labeled all the time. You're going to include the date that you either received the item, took the item out of the freezer, opened an item. You always want to denote on there somehow when the item was opened or when the item was prepared. If it is a TCS food, like here in the picture, it is potato salad, and the operation where they're working has probably decided that up to their standards, potato salad is good for 2 days. Okay, so that gives them until the 27th to use it, and then initials of the person who actually made it. Okay, the Servsafe and most health departments do give you 7 days to actually use up a food item. So when you are making the labels on your food, you would be able to write them for 6 days ahead of the day that you make it. So labeling food packaged on site for retail sale. So this is something where you would maybe make some peanut brittle, you're going to package it, vacuum pack it, put some sort of a pretty label on it, going to put a bow on it, and you're going to put those in maybe a gift basket or something. This is going to have certain packaging requirements. Same thing for farmers markets if you're going to send something off-site. You're going to have to properly label the food so that everyone would kind of clearly understand what it is that is in the package. The quantity of the food, so either the weight or the count. If the item contains 2 or more ingredients, you're going to have to list the ingredients and sub-ingredients in descending order by weight. So the first ingredient on the list is always the primary ingredient. This is the same way for how your foods are labeled in the grocery store. If you look on the back of the label, the first couple ingredients are the primary labels or the primary ingredients on the label. And then as you go further and further down, um, the last items are usually just teeny tiny trace amounts of flavorings or salt or something. You're going to have to list any artificial colors and flavors in the food, including chemical preservatives, the name and place of the business, the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. So some people will just repackage items. They will buy in bulk and then they will repackage into smaller quantities. You would put the original item, manufacturer, packer, distributor on the label. If you're making it in-house, then you're going to put your name there. If you are selling to a farmer's market, then you're going to have to also put the disclaimer that it was made in a home kitchen and not a commercial kitchen. Source of each major food allergen contained in the food, so such as peanuts or any shrimp powder or anything like that where people could possibly have an allergic reaction. Okay. So when you're making out your labels for your TCS foods, these are primarily for foods that are going to be held either in the refrigerator or in the freezer. So any food that has to be held at 41 degrees or lower, you have 7 days. But the 7 days begins on day 1. So the day that you make it is day 1. So that's the first day. So in this example, they made potato salad on October 1st, October 1. You would have to discard it on October 7th, okay? So basically, you're going to take the date plus 6 because you only get those 6 days past the day that you make it. Some operations write the day or date the food was prepared on the label. Others write the use by date on the label. Most of the time, you're going to see both. In Harris County, you're going to see both. We have a little bit stricter health inspectors than other places. If you use product from an item that has been prepared ahead of the day that you use it, so for instance, you have some fish, you have some broccoli, you have some sauce. You're going to make some sort of a dish with this. So the fish was made 4 days ago. The broccoli was made 1 day ago. The sauce was made 2 days ago. You're going to have to put the use by date based on the oldest item that is in your meal. So that would be the fish. So you would only have a couple days left to use up that product. So I always remember that if you are, making a jambalaya or something where you would use up a lot of leftovers, you would have to use on the label the date of the oldest item that's going into that dish. Date marking. So if a commercially processed food has a use by date that is less than 7 days from the date the container was opened, then the container should be marked with the use by date as long as the date is based on food safety. When combining food in a dish with different use by dates, so this is what I was just talking about, you're going to have to account for the oldest food that is present in the dish. So in this example, consider a shrimp and sausage jambalaya prepared on December 4th. The shrimp has a use by date of December 8th. The sausage has a use by date of December 10th. And so the use by date of the jambalaya has to be December 8th, even though, we're considering that the sausage would be still good for a couple extra days. It doesn't matter because it's all been mixed together into the jambalaya. So we have to base it on the use by date of the shrimp. Okay, so they have a hanging thermometer in the back of the cooler. Is this the best place to put it? They're going to say no because the back of the cooler is typically the coldest area of the cooler. You would want to make sure that all areas of the cooler are going to be an ambient temperature of 41 degrees or lower. So you would want to put it a little bit closer to the front, closer to the door. Okay, so this person is using a digital probe thermometer and they are testing the chicken salad. Is this correct or incorrect storage practice? So if you read the thermometer, it says 68 degrees. Is that an acceptable storage temperature? Absolutely not. We know that that is in the food danger zone. So the answer is B, it's incorrect. Um, you need to store any TCS food with an internal temperature of 41 degrees or lower. And then you need to monitor your food temperatures regularly. So if, for instance, this food is out on a serving line, maybe in a cafeteria, you would have to do checks on that to randomly sample the temperature of the stored food to verify that the cooler is working properly. Okay, so this one is a potato salad. Is this a correct or an incorrect storage practice? So we know that it is less than the 7 days that are the 7 total days that we are allowed. So we would say yes, this is a correct storage policy. Most likely this is an internal policy where the place dictates that they only serve composed salads such as this for 2 days. Okay. So this is an example of a dry goods room. Are the cans being rotated according to FIFO? So what does FIFO stand for? First in, first out. You would have to store the items with the earliest use by or expiration dates in front of the items with the later dates. So you would have to look at the dates. The year is 2005, so all the 2005s are in the front. Then we've got January 2006 and we've got February 2006. They are doing it correctly. Good job. Is this correct or incorrect storage practice? So they have some onions. However, it looks like they are in a chemical room because above it on that top shelf, it looks like those are some sort of cleaning chemicals. Chemicals, as we know, have to be stored separate and away from all food items. In the school, we actually put them in a separate room. We have a chemical room that we use for that storage so that it's nowhere near the food. It could be entirely possible for someone to open a container and then maybe some powder drip down onto the onions. Those onions end up getting cut raw for a burger, and then someone inadvertently is poisoned in that way. That's a very common issue that people experience when they are poisoned in that way, is that it comes from improper food storage. Is this a correct or incorrect storage practice? So what we're looking at is how these things are placed into the cooler. So these are containers of milk. They're in milk cartons. Now you have to look at the protocol for how far things have to be up off the floor and away from the walls. So the answer is B, it is incorrect. These items are stored on the floor, which is not allowed. You always have to have a dunnage rack or some sort of a shelf to keep them up off the floor. Store items away from the walls and at least 6 inches off of the floor. So nothing should be right up against the wall and nothing should be touching the floor. Okay, so we have some broccoli and bell peppers on the bottom, and then you have some meat products on the top shelf. So is this correct or incorrect according to how we would stack a refrigerator? You have to always remember that you're going, oh, I'm sorry, that's not broccoli, that's lettuce. So when you are filling your refrigerator, you're going to, keep in mind your cooking temperatures. So the higher the cooking temperature, like for instance, chicken has to be cooked to 165, we know that that has to be at the very, very bottom because anything that, if the chicken were to drip on something else, say a vegetable that only has to be cooked to 135, then there's a very good chance that that salmonella would survive. So this is just a means of maintaining safety in our storage. Also, these things should be covered. So nothing should really be left out like this. Um, Also, they're using a bus tub. So I'm not certain if this bus tub is a food only bus tub or not. But in the event that it's not designated as only food, which I think that safe to say it's probably not here, then this would also kind of be a violation. You would want to use only containers that are used for food items only. Anything that is used for trash or waste needs to be completely separate. Um, so we're going to prevent all these food juices from dripping down onto the fresh vegetables by storing them underneath. These would have to be flipped. Okay, so this is how you actually maintain your coolers. This is super important. Make a note of this, draw yourself a refrigerator, and make yourself a picture of how this goes. Ready to eat food is always at the top, and then B represents seafood. The middle shelf is going to be whole cuts of beef and pork. So the ground meats are going to go below the whole cuts of meat because items that have gone through processing have basically a greater potential for harboring bacteria because multiple animals are being combined in that process. And then we've got whole and ground poultry at the bottom. Eggs would also go at the bottom. So please never leave, a tray of eggs on the top shelf of the cooler. That is going to be a violation. I see students do that often. We need to remember our cooler order every day whenever you're in the labs. It's very important. Health inspectors check this every time. The storage order is based on the minimum internal cooking temperature of each food. So if you remember your internal temperatures, that will dictate how the shelves are actually going to go whenever you store your food. Frozen items that are being thawed in coolers must also be stored below ready-to-eat food. So, if they're dropping condensation or something, you wouldn't want that to drop on top of your lettuce. And for our last slide, even if you're short on space, you can never, ever, ever store foods in the following areas. So locker rooms or dressing rooms, you cannot use a locker to store bread or something like that. Restrooms or garbage rooms, even if it's right next to where the rest of your food is prepared, it has to be separate so that there's no crossover. Mechanical rooms, under and unshielded sewer lines or leaking water lines, under stairwells. So these are all areas where things can potentially contaminate them, things can like drop down on them. It's not safe food handling procedure. These would be violations if a health inspector came into your building. So look through the last questions in your book and try to answer them to test your knowledge and get ready for the quiz.